Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing in the cool shadows of a magnificent temple carved into the golden cliffs of the Egyptian desert. Towering columns rise around you, painted in brilliant reds, blues, and golds. On the walls, images tell the story of a ruler who commanded armies, built monuments that still stand after 3,500 years, and claimed divine birth from the king of the gods himself. But this ruler was not a king. She was a queen who became pharaoh, who wore the false beard of kingship, and who ruled Egypt during one of the most prosperous periods in its entire history. Her name was Hatshepsut, and her story is just one of many remarkable tales of the women who shaped ancient Egypt. Tonight, we journey through more than 3,000 years of Egyptian history to meet the extraordinary queens, female pharaohs, and powerful women who wielded influence in ways that would have been impossible in almost any other ancient civilization. From Hatshepsut, who ruled as pharaoh for over 20 years, to Cleopatra, who held her own against the might of Rome. From Nefertiti, whose beauty still captivates us today, to Nefertari, who was so beloved that her husband built her one of the most beautiful tombs in all of Egypt. These women navigated a world dominated by men and gods, and their stories reveal both the possibilities and limitations that shaped women's lives in the ancient world. Let your breathing slow and your mind drift as we explore the lives of Egypt's most remarkable women, queens who changed history and whose legacies echo across millennia. Fact 1. Ancient Egypt granted women more rights and freedoms than almost any other civilization in the ancient world. Egyptian women could own property in their own names, inherit wealth from their parents, run businesses, initiate legal proceedings in courts, and even divorce their husbands if they were unhappy in their marriages. They could serve as priestesses in temples, work as professional mourners at funerals, or manage large estates while their husbands were away. While Egyptian society was still fundamentally patriarchal with men holding most positions of power, the legal and social position of women was remarkably advanced compared to contemporary civilizations in Greece, Rome, or Mesopotamia, where women were essentially property of their fathers or husbands with few independent rights. Fact 2. Royal women held particular importance in ancient Egyptian ideology because the right to rule was believed to pass through the female line. A man became pharaoh not just through his father but through his connection to royal women, which is why pharaohs so often married their sisters or half-sisters. These marriages were not romantic unions but political arrangements designed to strengthen claims to the throne by combining male descent with female royal blood. The title of God's wife held tremendous religious significance, giving the woman who bore it direct connection to divine power. Royal mothers, wives, and daughters played crucial roles in legitimizing pharaonic authority even when they did not rule directly themselves. Fact 3. Hatshepsut was not the first woman to rule Egypt, but she was the first to claim the full titles and regalia of a male pharaoh, presenting herself not as a queen ruling temporarily but as a true king of Upper and Lower Egypt. She was born around 1507 BCE as the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his principal wife Queen Ahmose. Her royal blood was impeccable, but being female, she was not expected to rule. Instead, she was married to her half-brother Thutmose II, the son of her father by a lesser wife, in order to strengthen his claim to the throne. This was a common arrangement in Egyptian royal families, combining the bloodlines to produce heirs with double claims to legitimacy. Fact 4. Thutmose II was a weak king who accomplished little during his short reign and suffered from poor health throughout his life. When he died after ruling for only about 14 years, his designated heir was Thutmose III, his son by a minor wife named Iset. But Thutmose III was just a small child, perhaps only 2 or 3 years old, far too young to rule Egypt. Someone needed to serve as regent, governing the country until the boy came of age. Hatshepsut, as the great royal wife and the daughter of the previous legitimate pharaoh, was the obvious choice. She became regent for her young stepson and nephew, initially ruling in his name while he grew toward manhood. Fact 5. But Hatshepsut did not simply wait quietly for Thutmose III to grow up and take power. Within a few years of becoming regent, she began to expand her role, taking on more and more royal prerogatives. She started appearing in inscriptions with increasingly grand titles. She began commissioning building projects in her own name. And around year 7 of the young king's reign, she took the extraordinary step of declaring herself pharaoh, not regent, not queen, but king of Upper and Lower Egypt with all the powers and titles that position entailed. She did not remove Thutmose III from his position. Instead, she became his co-ruler, the senior partner in a joint kingship that would last for over 20 years. Fact 6. To legitimize her unprecedented claim to pharaonic power, Hatshepsut constructed an elaborate mythology around her birth and destiny. She commissioned inscriptions and reliefs telling the story of her divine conception, claiming that the god Ammonius himself had visited her mother Queen Almos in the form of her father Thutmose I. The god, recognizing that Almos was the most beautiful woman in the land, filled the palace with divine perfume and revealed his true nature to the queen, who welcomed him joyfully. From this union, Hatshepsut was conceived, making her not merely the daughter of a pharaoh but the physical child of the king of the gods himself. This divine birth narrative gave religious sanction to her rule, suggesting that the gods had always intended for her to become pharaoh. Fact 7. Hatshepsut went further than any previous ruling queen by adopting the full regalia and visual presentation of a male pharaoh. In statues and reliefs, she was depicted wearing the traditional short kilt of a king rather than the long dress of a queen. She wore the Nemes headdress, the striped cloth that covered the head and fell over the shoulders, and the various crowns associated with pharaonic authority. Most strikingly, she was shown wearing the false beard, a ceremonial chin piece that was the distinctive mark of Egyptian kingship. This was not deception or disguise. Everyone knew Hatshepsut was a woman. The male regalia was symbolic, indicating that she held the office of pharaoh with all its powers and responsibilities, regardless of her biological sex. Fact 8. The language used to describe Hatshepsut in official inscriptions reflects the unprecedented nature of her position. Egyptian grammar had gendered pronouns and word endings, so scribes faced a genuine puzzle when writing about a female pharaoh. Some inscriptions refer to her with feminine pronouns and titles while giving her masculine titles of kingship. Others switch between masculine and feminine within the same text. Some later inscriptions use masculine forms consistently, treating her grammatically as male because she held a male office. This linguistic confusion reveals how Hatshepsut's rule challenged fundamental categories of Egyptian thought, forcing scribes to improvise solutions for describing something their language had never needed to express before. Fact 9. Despite the challenges of being a female ruler in a patriarchal society, Hatshepsut proved to be an extraordinarily effective pharaoh. Under her rule, Egypt enjoyed remarkable prosperity and stability. She restored temples that had been damaged or neglected during the period of foreign rule by the Hyksos invaders who had dominated Egypt before her dynasty drove them out. She commissioned ambitious building projects throughout Egypt, employing thousands of workers and demonstrating the wealth and organizational capacity of her government. She maintained Egypt's borders and its influence over neighboring territories. By any objective measure, her reign was one of the most successful in Egyptian history. Fact 10. Hatshepsut's greatest architectural achievement was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri on the west bank of the Nile opposite Thebes. This magnificent structure, known as Djeser meaning Holy of Holies, was built into the dramatic cliffs of the Theban hills, its terraced colonnades rising gracefully against the golden rock. The temple was designed by Hatshepsut's chief architect and possible lover Senenmut, one of the most powerful officials of her reign. Its elegant proportions and innovative design made it one of the most beautiful buildings in ancient Egypt, and it remains one of the most visited archaeological sites today. The temple walls were covered with painted reliefs depicting the achievements of Hatshepsut's reign, including her divine birth, her coronation, and her famous trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt. Fact 11. The expedition to Punt was one of Hatshepsut's proudest achievements, commemorated in detailed reliefs on the walls of her mortuary temple. Punt was a wealthy trading partner located somewhere along the coast of East Africa or Arabia, a source of precious incense, exotic animals, ebony, ivory, and gold. Egypt had traded with Punt for centuries, but the route had been neglected during troubled times. Hatshepsut organized a major expedition of 5 large ships carrying soldiers, officials, and trade goods to re-establish this valuable connection. The reliefs show the Egyptian ships arriving in Punt, meeting with the local king Pharaoh and his remarkably obese queen Adi, and loading their vessels with treasures including 31 living myrrh trees that Hatshepsut intended to plant at her temple. Fact 12. The depiction of Queen Adi of Punt in Hatshepsut's temple reliefs has fascinated observers for over a century. Unlike the idealized figures typical of Egyptian art, Adi is shown with realistic detail that borders on caricature. She appears enormously fat, with rolls of flesh on her arms and legs, a massive belly, and a curved spine possibly indicating a medical condition. Some scholars have suggested she suffered from a disease that caused her unusual appearance. Others think the Egyptian artists simply documented what they saw, recording this foreign queen's distinctive body type without the idealization they would have applied to Egyptian royalty. Whatever the reason, the image of Adi provides a rare glimpse of realistic portraiture in our artistic tradition that usually preferred idealized forms. Fact 13. Senenmut, the architect of Hatshepsut's temple and one of the most powerful men of her reign, remains a mysterious and controversial figure. He rose from non-royal origins to become the most important official in Egypt, holding over 80 titles including steward of the god's wife, overseer of royal works, and tutor to the royal princess Nefertari. He was trusted with overseeing Hatshepsut's most important building projects and may have been the driving force behind her propaganda campaigns justifying her rule. The nature of his relationship with Hatshepsut has been debated for decades. Some historians believe they were lovers, pointing to his unprecedented prominence, his access to royal spaces, and a crude graffito found in a tomb that appears to show a sexual encounter between a male figure and a pharaoh. Others argue their relationship was purely professional and that the evidence for romance has been exaggerated. Fact 14. Senenmut disappears from the historical record around year 16 of Hatshepsut's reign, about 5 years before her own death, and his fate remains unknown. He had been preparing an elaborate tomb for himself near Hatshepsut's temple, decorated with the earliest known astronomical ceiling showing stars and constellations. But the tomb was never completed, and Senenmut's mummy has never been found. Some scholars suggest he fell from favor, perhaps because of his presumptuous behavior or because of political changes at court. Others think he may simply have died of natural causes and been buried elsewhere. The mystery of Senenmut's fate adds another layer of intrigue to the already fascinating story of Hatshepsut's reign. Fact 15. Thutmose III, Hatshepsut's stepson and co-ruler, spent most of his youth in a peculiar position, officially pharaoh but with little actual power while his stepmother dominated the government. He appears to have been raised at least partly in the temple of Ammonius at Karnak, receiving education and religious training from the priests. He was not imprisoned or mistreated, and he was allowed to maintain his royal titles and participate in ceremonial functions. As he grew older, he began to take on military roles, learning the arts of war that would later make him one of Egypt's greatest warrior kings. Whether he resented Hatshepsut's dominance or accepted it as necessary given his youth is impossible to know from surviving evidence. Fact 16. Hatshepsut died around 1458 BCE after ruling Egypt for over 20 years, and Thutmose III finally became sole ruler in his own right at approximately age 22. His reign would prove to be one of the most militarily successful in Egyptian history. He launched 17 military campaigns into Syria and Palestine, extending Egyptian power to its greatest territorial extent. He defeated a coalition of Canaanite kings at the Battle of Megiddo in one of the earliest military engagements documented in detail. He was later called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt for his military genius and administrative capabilities. But the question that has fascinated historians is what happened to Hatshepsut's memory after her death. Fact 17. Sometime during his reign, Thutmose III ordered the systematic destruction of Hatshepsut's monuments and the erasure of her name and image from inscriptions throughout Egypt. Her statues were torn down, smashed, and buried in pits near her temple. Her images on temple walls were chiseled out. Her cartouches, the oval frames containing her royal names, were cut from inscriptions and sometimes replaced with the names of Thutmose I, Thutmose II, or Thutmose III himself. This campaign of destruction, called Damnatio Memoriae in Latin, was thorough and systematic, requiring considerable effort and resources over many years. Fact 18. The traditional explanation for this destruction was that Thutmose III hated his stepmother and wanted revenge for the years she had dominated him and prevented him from ruling in his own right. This interpretation painted Hatshepsut as a wicked stepmother who had stolen power from the rightful king and was finally punished after her death when her victim came into his inheritance. But this explanation has been increasingly questioned by modern scholars who point out that the destruction did not begin immediately after Hatshepsut's death but apparently many years later, toward the end of Thutmose III's long reign. If the campaign was driven by personal hatred, why wait so long? Fact 19. Modern scholars have proposed alternative explanations for the destruction of Hatshepsut's monuments. Some suggest it was intended not to punish Hatshepsut but to simplify the historical record, eliminating the confusing period of joint rule and presenting a cleaner line of male succession from Thutmose I through Thutmose II to Thutmose III. Others argue it was designed to prevent Hatshepsut's reign from serving as a precedent that might encourage other royal women to claim pharaonic power, potentially threatening the succession of Thutmose III's own designated heir. Still others suggest the destruction may have been connected to religious reforms or changes in court politics late in the reign. The true motivation remains debated. Fact 20. Despite the efforts to erase her memory, Hatshepsut was not completely forgotten. Some of her monuments survived intact, hidden or overlooked by those charged with destroying them. Her cartouches were not always completely erased, allowing later scholars to reconstruct her names. Mentions of her reign survived in official records and king lists. When archaeologists began exploring Egypt in the 19th and 20th centuries, they pieced together the evidence of her reign and gradually recovered the story of one of ancient Egypt's most remarkable rulers. Today Hatshepsut is recognized as one of the most successful pharaohs in Egyptian history, her accomplishments celebrated rather than hidden. Fact 21. Hatshepsut's mummy was long thought to be lost, but in 2007, Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass announced its identification. The mummy had actually been discovered in 1903 in a minor tomb in the Valley of the Kings, but it was dismissed as an unknown woman, probably a royal nurse, and largely forgotten for a century. The breakthrough came when CT scans of a wooden box bearing Hatshepsut's name revealed it contained a molar tooth. When this tooth was matched to a gap in the jaw of the unidentified mummy, the identification was confirmed. The mummy shows Hatshepsut died around age 50, was overweight, and probably suffered from diabetes and bone cancer that had spread throughout her body. She may have been applying a lotion to treat a skin condition. An analysis of this lotion revealed it contained a carcinogenic substance that might have contributed to her illness. Fact 22. While Hatshepsut was the most successful female pharaoh, she was not the only woman to rule Egypt. At least 6 women are known to have held pharaonic power at various points in Egyptian history, and others may have ruled during periods for which records have been lost. The first may have been Mernith, who ruled during the First Dynasty around 3000 BCE, nearly 1500 years before Hatshepsut. Her tomb at Abydos was as large and elaborate as those of contemporary male kings, and her name appeared on king lists, suggesting she ruled in her own right rather than merely serving as regent. Fact 23. Sobenferu ruled Egypt at the end of the 12th dynasty around 1800 BCE, becoming the first woman to definitely use the full title of King of Upper and Lower Egypt. She came to power after the death of her brother Amenemhat IV, who died without a male heir. Rather than let the dynasty end, Sobenferu claimed the throne and ruled for approximately 4 years before her own death ended the dynasty. Like Hatshepsut after her, she was depicted in both feminine and masculine royal attire, sometimes wearing the king's kilt over a woman's dress. Her reign, though short, demonstrated that female rule was possible within Egyptian ideology when circumstances demanded. Fact 24. Nefertiti, whose name means the beautiful one has come, remains one of the most famous women of the ancient world, though much about her life remains mysterious. She was the principal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the heretic king who attempted to transform Egyptian religion by worshipping only Aten, the sun disk, and abandoning the traditional gods. Nefertiti appears prominently in artwork from Akhenaten's reign, depicted alongside her husband in scenes of worship, family life, and royal ceremony with a prominence unusual for Egyptian queens. She bore Akhenaten at least 6 daughters and may have been co-regent with him during part of his reign. Fact 25. The famous bust of Nefertiti, discovered in 1912 in the workshop of the ancient sculptor Thutmose at Amarna, has become one of the most recognized images from the ancient world. The bust shows a woman of extraordinary elegance with delicate features, a long graceful neck, and high cheekbones. She wears a distinctive flat-topped blue crown that appears to have been unique to her. One eye is inlaid with crystal and painted with the distinctive black eyeliner of Egyptian fashion, while the other eye socket is empty, probably because the bust was a sculptor's model and was never finished. The bust now resides in the Neues Museum in Berlin, and Egypt has repeatedly but unsuccessfully requested its return. Fact 26. Nefertiti's fate after Akhenaten's death remains one of ancient Egypt's greatest mysteries. She disappears from the historical record around year 12 of her husband's 17-year reign, and her end is unknown. Some scholars believe she died, perhaps from the plague that swept through the ancient world at that time. Others argue she was disgraced and exiled. But intriguingly, some evidence suggests she may have survived Akhenaten and ruled briefly as pharaoh under a different name, Smenkhare or Nefertiti, before the throne passed to the young Tutankhamun. If true, this would make her another in the small list of women who claimed Egypt's highest office. Fact 27. The tomb of Nefertiti has never been positively identified, which has fueled speculation and searches for over a century. In 2015, archaeologist Nicholas Reeves proposed that her tomb might be hidden behind the walls of Tutankhamun's burial chamber in the Valley of the Kings. He noted unusual features in the wall paintings and radar scans that seemed to show empty spaces beyond the known chambers. Subsequent investigation with more advanced technology produced ambiguous results, and the Egyptian government has been cautious about allowing invasive exploration that might damage Tutankhamun's tomb. Whether Nefertiti lies hidden behind those walls, in an undiscovered tomb elsewhere, or was destroyed in antiquity remains unknown. Fact 28. Nefertari was the favorite wife of Ramesses II, the powerful pharaoh who ruled Egypt for 67 years during the 13th century BCE. Ramesses had many wives and over 100 children, but Nefertari held a special place in his heart. He called her the one for whom the sun shines and commissioned for her one of the most beautiful tombs ever created in the Valley of the Queens. The tomb's walls are covered with brilliantly colored paintings showing Nefertari in elegant white gowns, wearing elaborate jewelry, and interacting with the gods. The quality of the artwork is exceptional, and conservation efforts have preserved its vivid colors despite millennia underground. Fact 29. The Temple of Abu Simbel, carved into a cliff overlooking the Nile in southern Egypt, demonstrates the special status Nefertari held in Ramesses' affections. The main temple features 4 colossal statues of Ramesses himself, each over 60 feet tall. But nearby stands a second, smaller temple dedicated to the goddess Hathor and to Queen Nefertari. Its facade shows 2 statues of Nefertari flanked by 4 statues of Ramesses, and remarkably, her statues are nearly as large as his. For a queen to be depicted at equal scale with a pharaoh was highly unusual and indicates the extraordinary regard in which Ramesses held her. Inscriptions call her the one for whose sake the very sun does shine. Fact 30. Nefertari bore Ramesses at least 4 sons and 2 daughters before her death around year 24 of his reign. Her passing clearly grieved the pharaoh, who continued to honor her memory throughout his long life. She was buried in her magnificent tomb in the Valley of the Queens with elaborate funerary equipment befitting her status. The tomb was robbed in antiquity and her mummy has never been recovered, but fragments of her sarcophagus and shabdis, the small servant figurines intended to work for the deceased in the afterlife, have survived. Her tomb remains one of the treasures of Egyptian archaeology and a testament to the love between a powerful king and his favorite queen. Fact 31. Tai was the remarkably influential wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III and grandmother of Tutankhamun. Unlike most royal wives who came from the Egyptian nobility or foreign royal families, Tai was the daughter of a provincial official, not of royal blood. Her elevation to the position of great royal wife was unusual enough that Amenhotep issued commemorative scarabs announcing their marriage and emphasizing that she was his chief queen despite her non-royal origins. This public acknowledgement of her status suggests that either love or political calculation led Amenhotep to break with tradition, and Tai would prove to be a powerful partner throughout his reign. Fact 32. Tai's influence was recognized beyond Egypt's borders, with foreign kings addressing correspondence directly to her rather than only to her husband. The Amarna letters, a collection of diplomatic correspondence found at Akhenaten's abandoned capital, include letters from the king of Mitanni specifically addressed to Queen Tai, asking her to ensure that friendly relations between the two kingdoms continued under her son Akhenaten. This foreign recognition of a queen's political importance was remarkable and indicates that Tai was seen internationally as a major figure in Egyptian government, not merely as the pharaoh's wife. Fact 33. After Amenhotep III's death, Tai remained influential during the reign of her son Akhenaten. She appears in artwork from his reign, sometimes shown in scenes of worship alongside the royal family. She maintained her own estates and household, and she may have served as an advisor to her son during the turbulent religious reforms he implemented. Her mummy was eventually identified among those recovered from a royal cache in the Valley of the Kings, and CT scans revealed she was a small woman who died in her 50s, with worn teeth and evidence of probable arthritis in her later years. Fact 34. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was actually Greek rather than ethnically Egyptian. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who took control of Egypt after Alexander's death in 323 BCE. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, maintaining many Egyptian customs and presenting themselves as traditional pharaohs while remaining culturally Greek. They founded the famous Library of Alexandria and made their capital a center of learning and culture. But they generally did not bother to learn the Egyptian language, speaking Greek among themselves and using translators when dealing with their Egyptian subjects. Fact 35. Cleopatra was different. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in nearly 3 centuries to learn the Egyptian language, and she made a point of participating in traditional Egyptian religious ceremonies and presenting herself as a legitimate pharaoh in the Egyptian tradition. She reportedly spoke at least 9 languages, allowing her to communicate directly with ambassadors and visiting dignitaries from around the Mediterranean without needing interpreters. Ancient sources emphasized her intelligence and charm rather than her physical beauty, suggesting that her power over men came from her wit, education, and personality rather than mere appearance. Fact 36. Cleopatra came to power around 51 BCE when she was approximately 18 years old, initially ruling jointly with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII as was traditional in the Ptolemaic dynasty. But the siblings quickly came into conflict, and Cleopatra was driven out of Alexandria by her brother's supporters around 48 BCE. She was raising an army to retake her throne when fate intervened in the form of Julius Caesar, the Roman general and dictator who arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey. Finding Pompey already dead, killed by Egyptians hoping to curry favor, Caesar involved himself in the Egyptian succession dispute. Fact 37. The famous story of Cleopatra being smuggled into Caesar's presence rolled up in a carpet may be legendary embellishment, but the meeting between them certainly occurred and changed history. Cleopatra convinced Caesar to support her claim against her brother, and when Ptolemy's forces besieged the Romans in the palace, Caesar's military skill eventually prevailed. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile trying to escape after his forces were defeated, and Cleopatra was restored to the throne. She and Caesar became lovers, and she bore him a son called Caesarion, Little Caesar, whom she hoped might one day inherit both Egypt and Rome. Fact 38. Cleopatra traveled to Rome around 46 BCE, living in one of Caesar's properties across the Tiber River and causing scandal among conservative Romans who disapproved of their leader's relationship with a foreign queen. She may have been present in Rome when Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, stabbed by conspirators who feared he intended to make himself king. With her protector dead and Rome descending into civil war, Cleopatra returned to Egypt to secure her position. She reportedly had her remaining brother and co-ruler Ptolemy XIV killed, probably by poisoning, and elevated young Caesarion as her co-ruler instead. Fact 39. As Rome's civil war sorted itself into a struggle between Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's nephew and adopted heir, Cleopatra allied herself with Antony. Their meeting at Tarsus in 41 BCE was a masterpiece of theatrical politics. Cleopatra arrived on a golden barge with purple sails, silver oars, and herself dressed as Aphrodite surrounded by attendants dressed as sea nymphs. Antony, waiting to receive her as a Roman magistrate receiving a client ruler, found himself outmaneuvered and overshadowed by her spectacular entrance. Their political alliance quickly became a romantic relationship that would last for the rest of their lives. Fact 40. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children, twins named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and a younger son named Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony acknowledged these children and granted them grandiose titles to territories that he conquered or claimed for Rome. He remained legally married to Octavian's sister Octavia for diplomatic reasons, creating a complicated personal and political situation. But his heart was clearly with Cleopatra, and he increasingly based himself in Alexandria rather than Rome, adopting Eastern customs and styles that offended traditional Roman sensibilities. Fact 41. The final break came when Antony divorced Octavia and openly acknowledged Cleopatra and their children with grants of Roman territory. Octavian, seeking a pretext for war against his rival, declared war not on Antony but on Cleopatra, framing the conflict as a struggle between Roman civilization and Eastern barbarism represented by the Egyptian queen. The decisive Battle of Actium in 31 BCE was a naval engagement off the coast of Greece in which Octavian's forces defeated the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The couple escaped to Egypt, but their cause was lost. Fact 42. Rather than surrender to Octavian and be paraded through Rome as a captive in his triumph, both Antony and Cleopatra chose suicide. Antony died in Cleopatra's arms after stabbing himself with his own sword, believing falsely that Cleopatra was already dead. Cleopatra survived a few days longer, attempting to negotiate with Octavian to secure her children's futures, but when she realized he intended to take her to Rome as a prisoner, she took her own life. Ancient sources claim she died from the bite of an asp, a cobra whose venom caused painless death. Modern scholars debate whether this story is accurate or whether she used poison, but the result was the same. With Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, the 3,000-year era of Egyptian pharaohs came to an end. Fact 43. Cleopatra's death was not just the end of a life but the end of an entire civilization as an independent entity. Egypt became a Roman province, ruled by a prefect appointed by the emperor. The wealth of Egypt, particularly its grain production, flowed to Rome, feeding the population of the imperial capital. Romans revered Egypt's ancient monuments but cared little for Egyptian culture or religion. The temples continued to function, and pharaonic traditions persisted for centuries, but Egypt was no longer master of its own destiny. The last pharaoh had been a woman, and she had played her final cards with skill and courage, but the forces of history had proven too strong. Fact 44. Beyond the famous queens and female pharaohs, ordinary women in ancient Egypt lived lives that combined remarkable freedoms with traditional expectations. Marriage was the expected norm for adult women, and producing children, especially sons, was considered their primary purpose. Yet within marriage, Egyptian women retained their own identities in ways unusual for the ancient world. They kept their own names rather than taking their husband's name. They maintained ownership of property they brought into the marriage. They could engage in business transactions, buy and sell property, and appear in court as witnesses or litigants in their own right. Fact 45. Marriage in ancient Egypt was primarily a practical arrangement rather than a religious ceremony. There appears to have been no religious ritual required for a valid marriage. Instead, a couple became married simply by establishing a household together and announcing their union to their community. Legal documents sometimes recorded marriages, particularly among the wealthy, specifying what property each spouse brought to the union and how it would be divided if the marriage ended. These marriage contracts show that Egyptian law recognized women's property rights and sought to protect them. Fact 46. Divorce was possible in ancient Egypt and could be initiated by either the husband or the wife. If a marriage ended, property was typically divided according to the terms of any marriage contract or, lacking such a document, according to general legal principles that usually gave the wife about 1/3 of jointly acquired property. A woman kept whatever she had brought into the marriage. If the husband was at fault for the divorce, through adultery or abuse, the wife might receive a larger share. These provisions gave women some economic protection and leverage within marriage, as divorce would not necessarily leave them destitute. Fact 47. Women could work outside the home in various professions, though their options were more limited than those available to men. Many women worked as weavers, producing linen cloth that was Egypt's primary textile and an important trade good. Women served as professional mourners at funerals, hired to wail and beat their chests in ritual grief. Some women worked as musicians and dancers, entertaining at religious festivals and private parties. A few women achieved positions of significant authority, serving as managers of large estates or as priestesses in important temples. But most women's work centered on the household, caring for children, preparing food, and managing domestic affairs. Fact 48. The priesthood offered one path to religious authority for women, though their roles were usually subordinate to male priests. Women served as priestesses of various goddesses and some gods, participating in temple rituals and maintaining sacred spaces. The position of God's wife of Ammonius became extremely powerful during certain periods, granting its holder significant religious authority and economic resources. Some gods' wives effectively ruled as local powers in Thebes, controlling temple estates and influencing political affairs. This religious role gave exceptional women access to power and influence that ordinary women could not achieve. Fact 49. Mothers were deeply respected in Egyptian culture, and the bond between mother and child was considered sacred. Wisdom texts advised children to honor their mothers, reminding them of the sacrifices mothers made in bearing, nursing, and raising them. When a mother died, children were expected to provide for her burial and maintain her tomb with offerings. The goddess Isis, who protected her son Horus and resurrected her husband Osiris, embodied the ideal of maternal love and devotion. Images of Isis nursing the infant Horus became one of the most common religious images in Egypt and may have influenced later Christian images of Mary and Jesus. Fact 50. Childbirth was dangerous for Egyptian women, as it was throughout the ancient world and remained until modern medicine. Many women died giving birth or from infections afterward. To protect themselves, pregnant women relied on religious and magical protections, wearing amulets depicting protective deities like Bes and Tauret, reciting spells from magical texts, and calling upon goddesses associated with childbirth. Midwives assisted with deliveries, and there is evidence of birthing stools that allowed women to give birth in a squatting position. When mothers and babies survived the dangers of childbirth, it was celebrated as a triumph over the forces of chaos and death. Fact 51. Women's beauty and adornment were important aspects of Egyptian culture, and both men and women used cosmetics extensively. The distinctive black eye makeup known as kohl was worn by virtually all Egyptians, serving both aesthetic and practical purposes. It was believed to protect the eyes from the harsh desert sun and from eye infections, and the lead-based compounds it contained may have had some antibacterial properties despite their toxicity. Women also used green eye paint made from malachite, red ochre to color their lips and cheeks, and various oils and perfumes to scent their bodies and hair. Fact 52. Wigs were fashion essentials for wealthy Egyptian women, who often shaved their natural hair or cut it short for cleanliness and comfort in the hot climate, then wore elaborate wigs for public occasions. These wigs were made from human hair, wool, or plant fibers, styled in intricate arrangements of braids and curls. Some wigs were enormous, falling to the shoulders or beyond, and would have taken considerable time and skill to create. The style of wig indicated social status, and fashion changed over the centuries, allowing modern scholars to date artworks by the hairstyles depicted. Fact 53. Jewelry was worn by Egyptian women of all social classes, though materials varied according to wealth. The wealthy wore gold, silver, and precious stones like lapis lazuli imported from distant Afghanistan, turquoise from Sinai, and carnelian from the desert. Poorer women wore jewelry of faience, a glazed ceramic material that could be made in bright blues and greens mimicking precious stones. Common jewelry items included broad collars made of multiple strands of beads, earrings, bracelets, anklets, and rings. Jewelry served not just decorative but also magical and religious purposes, with many pieces incorporating protective symbols and divine images. Fact 54. The goddess Hathor represented feminine beauty, love, music, and joy. She was depicted as a cow or as a beautiful woman with cow's ears and a headdress of cow horns holding the sun disk. Hathor was associated with music and dancing, and her priestesses performed sacred dances and played the sistrum, a rattle-like musical instrument sacred to her worship. She was also connected with the afterlife, welcoming the dead to the next world and offering them food and drink. Egyptian women prayed to Hathor for help with love, fertility, and beauty, and her cult was one of the most popular in Egypt. Fact 55. Isis was perhaps the most important goddess in the Egyptian pantheon, revered as the ideal wife and mother and as a powerful magician. According to myth, when her husband Osiris was murdered by his jealous brother Seth, Isis searched throughout Egypt for his scattered body parts, magically reassembled him, and conceived their son Horus. She then protected Horus from Seth until he was old enough to avenge his father and claim the throne. This myth made Isis a symbol of wifely devotion, maternal love, and magical power. Her cult spread far beyond Egypt, eventually becoming one of the most popular religions in the Roman Empire before being supplanted by Christianity. Fact 56. Sekhmet was a fearsome goddess with the head of a lioness, representing the destructive power of the sun and the fury of war. She was believed to breathe fire against Egypt's enemies and to send plagues against those who offended her. Yet she was also worshipped as a healer, and her priests were among the most skilled physicians in Egypt. This dual nature, destroyer and healer, reflected Egyptian understanding that dangerous forces could be harnessed for protection and that the same power that brought illness could cure it. Statues of Sekhmet were placed in temples to guard against evil, her fierce face warning enemies to stay away. Fact 57. Batet began as another fierce lion goddess but over time became associated with the domestic cat and took on a gentler character. She represented home, fertility, and protection, especially the protection of children. Cats were sacred to Batet, and killing a cat, even accidentally, was a serious crime that could be punished by death. When a beloved pet cat died, families mourned by shaving their eyebrows and having the cat mummified and buried with ceremony. The cult center of Batet at Bubastis was famous for its festivals, described by the Greek historian Herodotus as occasions of music, dancing, and considerable drinking. Fact 58. The goddess Nut represented the sky, depicted as a woman arched over the earth with stars covering her body. According to Egyptian belief, she swallowed the sun each evening and gave birth to it each morning, making the daily cycle of day and night a divine process of death and rebirth. Coffin lids were often painted with images of Nut, placing the deceased within her protective embrace and associating their death with the sun's nightly journey through darkness before its triumphant return. This imagery connected female generative power with cosmic processes and the hope for resurrection. Fact 59. Women participated in religious festivals as singers, dancers, and celebrants. Many festivals involved processions through city streets, carrying the statue of a god from one temple to another while crowds lined the route to watch and celebrate. Women played sistrums and tambourines, sang hymns, and danced in honor of the gods. Some festivals were occasions for ritual drunkenness, and texts describe festivals of Hathor at which participants drank to excess as a form of religious observance. These public celebrations offered women opportunities to participate in community life outside their usual domestic spheres. Fact 60. Royal women played important diplomatic roles, with princesses sent to foreign courts as wives to seal alliances and maintain friendly relations. Egyptian princesses married Hittite, Babylonian, and Mitannian kings as part of international diplomacy. These marriages created family connections between royal houses and were accompanied by lavish exchanges of gifts and diplomatic correspondence. Interestingly, Egyptian pharaohs were reluctant to send their daughters abroad, preferring to receive foreign princesses rather than send their own women to foreign lands, perhaps reflecting Egyptian pride and sense of cultural superiority. Fact 61. Foreign princesses who came to Egypt as royal wives entered a world very different from their homelands. They joined the king's harem, which was not the den of sensuality imagined by later fiction but rather an important institution where royal women and children lived, were educated, and were prepared for their roles. The great royal wife held the highest position among the king's wives, but other wives also held status and could wield influence. Some foreign wives appear to have maintained correspondence with their home countries, serving as informal diplomatic channels between kingdoms. Fact 62. Ahotep was a queen of the early 18th dynasty who played a crucial role in the wars that drove the foreign Hyksos rulers from Egypt. An inscription praises her for rallying Egyptian troops, collecting fugitive soldiers who had fled the battlefield, and pacifying rebellious regions of Upper Egypt during a time of crisis. Her tomb contained weapons and military awards including golden flies, which were decorations given for valor in battle. Whether Ahotep actually led troops in combat or simply provided crucial logistical and political support, her military contributions were recognized and celebrated, showing that exceptional women could transcend normal gender roles in times of crisis. Fact 63. Ahmose Nefertari, wife of the pharaoh Ahmose who finally expelled the Hyksos and founded the 18th dynasty, became one of the most venerated queens in Egyptian history. After her death, she was deified and worshipped as a goddess, particularly at Thebes where she was associated with resurrection and the afterlife. Her black-painted images in tombs have led some to misidentify her as a Nubian or African queen, but the black coloring was symbolic, representing fertility and rebirth rather than indicating actual skin color. She was worshipped for centuries after her death, one of only a few queens to achieve such lasting divine status. Fact 64. Enkhesinemen, the wife and probable half-sister of Tutankhamun, faced a terrifying situation after her young husband's unexpected death. Without children to succeed him and surrounded by powerful older men who wanted to control the throne, she apparently took the extraordinary step of writing to the Hittite king, Egypt's traditional enemy, asking him to send one of his sons to become her husband and pharaoh. Her letter expressed fear that she would be forced to marry a servant, someone beneath her station. The Hittite king was suspicious, but eventually sent a prince who was murdered at the Egyptian border, probably by those who opposed foreign rule. Enkhesinemen's fate after this incident is unknown. Fact 65. Tuzret was the last pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, ruling Egypt for about 2 years at the end of the 13th century BCE. She had been the great royal wife of Pharaoh Seti II and served as regent for his young son Siptah, who suffered from a physical disability that limited his ability to rule. When Siptah died without an heir, Tuzret declared herself pharaoh, taking full royal titles and beginning construction of a tomb for herself in the Valley of the Kings. Her reign was contested, and after her death Egypt fell into a period of chaos and civil war before the 20th dynasty restored order. Her tomb was later usurped by a subsequent pharaoh, and her memory was largely erased. Fact 66. Arsinoe II was a Ptolemaic queen who ruled Egypt jointly with her brother Ptolemy II in the 3rd century BCE, centuries after the native Egyptian dynasties had ended. She was married first to other Hellenistic kings before returning to Egypt and marrying her full brother, a practice that shocked Greeks but had precedence in pharaonic tradition. She wielded significant power, appearing on coins alongside her brother husband and being worshipped as a goddess during her lifetime. Her influence on Egyptian foreign policy and domestic affairs was substantial, and after her death she was deified and her cult was maintained for centuries. Fact 67. The practice of royal brother-sister marriage, while disturbing to modern sensibilities, made sense within Egyptian royal ideology. The gods themselves were married to their siblings, with Osiris married to Isis and Seth married to Nephthys. By marrying their sisters, pharaohs were imitating the divine pattern and keeping royal blood concentrated in the ruling family. The genetic consequences of this inbreeding were sometimes severe. Analysis of royal mummies has revealed evidence of genetic disorders that may have resulted from generations of close family marriages. Tutankhamun himself suffered from multiple health problems that may have been related to his parents being siblings. Fact 68. Not all women who wielded power in Egypt did so openly. Many exercised influence behind the scenes as advisors, confidants, and manipulators of powerful men. The mother of a young pharaoh might control the government in practice while her son sat on the throne in name. The favorite wife or concubine of an older pharaoh might influence his decisions on matters of state. Harem intrigues and poisoning plots occasionally roiled the court when women competed for power through their sons. The historical record, written by men, often obscures these forms of female influence, but they were real and sometimes decisive. Fact 69. Women as workers contributed significantly to the Egyptian economy despite their historical invisibility. Textile production was largely female work, and Egypt's linen was famous throughout the ancient world for its quality. Women brewed beer, one of Egypt's staple foods, and baked bread. They worked in agriculture during busy seasons when all hands were needed for planting or harvest. They served in wealthy households as servants, wet nurses, and caretakers. This labor was essential but often went unrecorded because it was considered ordinary and unremarkable, the expected contribution of women to family and society. Fact 70. Women's literacy in Egypt was rare but not unknown. The ability to read and write was a specialized skill that required years of education, and schools appear to have been primarily for boys being trained for scribal careers. However, some women from wealthy families learned to read, and women could commission scribes to write letters and documents on their behalf. A few texts appear to have been written by women themselves, suggesting that female literacy, while exceptional, did exist. One famous love poem appears to be written from a woman's perspective, expressing longing for her beloved in terms that reveal genuine female experience and emotion. Fact 71. The love poetry of ancient Egypt provides rare glimpses into the emotional lives of women, or at least into idealized expressions of female desire. Some poems are written in women's voices, expressing longing, jealousy, and passion. A woman describes her beloved as more intoxicating than wine and myrrh. Another complains that her heart flutters like a fish when she sees her love. Whether these poems were written by women or by men imagining female feelings is unknown, but they suggest that Egyptian culture valued romantic love and recognized women as subjects of desire with their own emotional experiences. Fact 72. Laments for the dead were traditionally performed by women, who served as professional mourners at funerals. Their wailing, crying, and beating of breasts expressed grief at the departure of the deceased and helped send them on their journey to the afterlife. Tomb paintings show groups of women with disheveled hair and tearing clothing, their grief displayed publicly as part of the funeral ritual. This emotional labor was women's work, a recognized contribution to the burial rites that ensured the deceased would reach the next world successfully. Fact 73. Women's bodies were subject to magic and medicine aimed at fertility, contraception, and healthy childbirth. Medical papyri contain remedies for various female complaints, from promoting conception to preventing miscarriage to easing labor pains. Contraceptive methods included recipes for pessaries made from various substances including crocodile dung, which may have provided some barrier effect, and honey, which might have had spermicidal properties. Whether these methods were effective is difficult to know, but they show that ancient Egyptian women sought to control their fertility and that their society recognized this as legitimate. Fact 74. The goddess Tauret protected pregnant women and mothers with newborns. She was depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright, with the tail of a crocodile and the paws of a lion. Despite her fearsome appearance, she was a benevolent deity whose frightening form was meant to scare away evil spirits that might harm mothers and babies. Amulets of Tauret were commonly worn by pregnant women, and her image appeared on headrests and beds to protect sleepers. Her cult was popular at all levels of society, from the palace to the humblest village. Fact 75. Bes, though male, was closely associated with women's concerns and appeared alongside Tauret in protecting childbirth and children. His grotesque appearance, with a lion's mane, protruding tongue, and dwarf body, was believed to frighten away demons. He appeared on cosmetic items, beds, and mirrors, ordinary objects of daily life that he protected from evil influence. Dancing and music associated with Bes celebrations were thought to promote happiness and drive away malevolent spirits. His protection of women and children made him one of the most beloved deities among ordinary Egyptians. Fact 76. Women could own slaves and employ servants, managing households that might include many dependent persons. Wealthy women oversaw complex domestic establishments with responsibilities comparable to managing a small business. They directed servants, managed supplies, maintained household accounts, and ensured that their families' needs were met. This domestic authority was real power, even if it operated within a limited sphere. Some women expanded beyond the household, managing agricultural estates, running workshops, or engaging in trade, though such activities were more common among widows who had inherited businesses from their husbands. Fact 77. Inheritance laws allowed Egyptian women to inherit property from their parents and to pass property on to their own children. When a man died without sons, his daughters could inherit. When a woman died, her personal property went to her children rather than reverting to her husband's family. These inheritance rights gave women economic independence and security that was unusual in the ancient world. A wealthy widow could live independently, managing her own affairs without requiring a male guardian, a freedom that women in many other ancient cultures did not enjoy. Fact 78. The image of the female pharaoh returning to prominence in modern times reflects contemporary interests in recovering women's voices from the past. Hatshepsut's story resonates with modern audiences interested in women who broke barriers and achieved power in male-dominated societies. Cleopatra fascinates as a brilliant strategist who used all available tools, including her sexuality, to preserve her kingdom. Nefertiti captivates with her beauty and mystery. These women are no longer footnotes in histories focused on male rulers but have become subjects of books, films, and exhibitions exploring their achievements on their own terms. Fact 79. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new information about women in ancient Egypt. DNA analysis of mummies provides information about family relationships and geographic origins. Isotope analysis of bones reveals information about diet and mobility. Examination of grave goods illuminates beliefs about women's roles in the afterlife. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of how women lived, worked, loved, and died in ancient Egypt, recovering voices that were often silenced or ignored in ancient records and previous scholarship. Fact 80. The temples that survive as Egypt's most impressive monuments were largely built by male labor for male gods and male pharaohs. Yet women were essential to the functioning of these sacred spaces. Priestesses served the gods through music, dance, and ritual. Women wove the linen garments that clothed divine statues. Wives and mothers of pharaohs appear in temple reliefs alongside their husbands and sons. The temples tell stories of divine families in which goddesses played essential roles. Even in monuments dominated by masculine power, the presence and importance of women can be discerned by those who look carefully. Fact 81. The decline of pharaonic civilization did not mean the end of women's presence in Egypt's story. During the Greek Ptolemaic period, queens like the Arsenos and Berenices wielded significant power. When Rome conquered Egypt, Egyptian women became subjects of a new empire but continued their lives, adapting to changed circumstances while maintaining cultural traditions. The rise of Christianity brought new ideals of womanhood, with female monasticism becoming an important part of Egyptian Christian practice. Through all these changes, the women of Egypt continued to bear children, manage households, work at their crafts, and shape history in ways large and small. Fact 82. The mummies of Egyptian women provide direct physical evidence of their lives. Examination of bones reveals evidence of the hard work many women performed, with arthritis and joint damage testifying to years of grinding grain, carrying heavy loads, and performing repetitive labor. Teeth worn down by sand and bread show the gritty reality of the Egyptian diet. Signs of multiple pregnancies mark bodies that fulfilled society's expectations of motherhood. Yet some mummies also show evidence of medical care, healed fractures, and treated wounds, suggesting that women's health was valued and their injuries tended. Fact 83. The artistic representation of women in Egyptian art followed conventions that idealized rather than individualized. Women were typically shown with yellow skin, distinguishing them from men who were shown with reddish-brown skin, possibly reflecting the reality that women spent more time indoors while men worked in the sun. Women were shown in graceful poses, wearing form-fitting dresses and elaborate jewelry. Their faces were idealized to conform to beauty standards rather than to capture individual likeness. Yet within these conventions, artists sometimes captured individual character, particularly in the Amarna period when naturalism briefly replaced idealized forms. Fact 84. The clothing of Egyptian women was relatively simple, consisting primarily of a sheath dress of white linen that extended from below the breasts to the ankles. Wealthy women wore finer, more elaborate versions of this basic garment, sometimes with pleating that required extensive labor to create and maintain. As fashions changed, additional elements were added, including shawls, cloaks, and more elaborate draping. Servants and working women might wear simpler versions, allowing greater freedom of movement. The relative simplicity of Egyptian women's clothing contrasts with the elaborate wigs and jewelry that provided opportunities for fashion display and status marking. Fact 85. The lives of ordinary women are harder to recover than those of queens and nobles because ordinary people left fewer records. The village of Deir el-Medina, where workers who built the royal tombs lived, provides exceptional documentation of everyday life including women's activities. Women there brewed beer, wove cloth, managed households, and occasionally appear in legal disputes recorded on pottery fragments. Their lives were constrained by expectations of marriage and motherhood but included meaningful work, community connections, and apparently, given the love poetry and personal items found, moments of joy and beauty amid daily labor. Fact 86. The women of Deir el-Medina faced real dangers in addition to the universal risks of childbirth. The village was isolated in the desert, far from the Nile, and required water to be delivered by donkeys. Supply shortages sometimes occurred, causing hardship. Snakes and scorpions posed deadly threats. Disease could sweep through the close quarters of the small community. Yet the village also provided security, with its inhabitants protected by the government and supported by regular rations. Women's experiences there were shaped by this peculiar combination of danger and protection, isolation and community. Fact 87. Sexual violence against women was recognized as a crime in ancient Egypt, though our evidence for how such cases were handled is limited. Texts mention penalties for rape, and the existence of legal recognition suggests that women could seek justice for sexual assault. However, the patriarchal nature of Egyptian society likely made reporting difficult, and we cannot know how often justice was actually achieved. Women's vulnerability to sexual exploitation by powerful men, including masters' sexual use of female slaves, was a reality that legal texts do not fully address. Fact 88. Prostitution existed in ancient Egypt, though its extent and social perception are debated. Some references in texts may describe ritual sexual acts performed in religious contexts rather than commercial prostitution. Other references clearly indicate women who sold sexual services. Whether such women were despised or tolerated, whether they operated independently or were controlled by others, and what legal protections they might have had are all questions that surviving evidence does not fully answer. Like many aspects of women's lives that official records ignored, prostitution exists at the margins of the historical record. Fact 89. The legacy of Egypt's powerful queens extends into modern popular culture, where Cleopatra especially remains an enduring figure of fascination. She has been portrayed in countless films, books, and artworks, from Shakespeare's tragedy to Elizabeth Taylor's epic film performance. The historical Cleopatra, intelligent and politically astute, is often overshadowed by romanticized images emphasizing her beauty and sexuality. Yet even distorted portrayals testify to her enduring power to capture imagination across millennia. Few ancient figures, male or female, have achieved such lasting cultural presence. Fact 90. Hatshepsut's modern rehabilitation from forgotten pharaoh to celebrated female ruler represents changing attitudes toward women's history. Early Egyptologists often disparaged her, echoing ancient attempts to erase her memory. As attitudes changed, scholars began to appreciate her achievements on their own terms. Today she is recognized as one of Egypt's most successful pharaohs, her reign characterized by peace, prosperity, and monumental building. Museums mount major exhibitions celebrating her accomplishments. Her story inspires discussions of women's leadership and the barriers they face. 3,500 years after her death, Hatshepsut has achieved the immortality she sought. Fact 91. Nefertiti's bust in Berlin remains controversial, with Egypt demanding its return and Germany refusing. The artifact's contested status reflects larger debates about cultural heritage, colonial archaeology, and who owns the past. The bust was found by a German expedition in 1912 and exported under circumstances that Egypt considers illegitimate. Germany maintains the export was legal under then-current agreements. Beyond the legal dispute lies a deeper question about how ancient women are represented and who controls their images. Nefertiti's beautiful face has become a symbol not just of ancient Egypt but of ongoing struggles over cultural property and representation. Fact 92. The women of Egypt's religious life included not just priestesses but also the devotees who prayed, made offerings, and sought divine help for their problems. Women visited temples to ask for healthy children, successful marriages, and protection from danger. They made vows to gods, promising offerings in return for answered prayers. They participated in festivals, adding their voices to hymns and their hands to sacred music. This religious life was not mere superstition but a meaningful system for understanding the world and one's place in it, providing community, comfort, and connection to powers beyond everyday existence. Fact 93. Death brought Egyptian women to the same divine judgment as men, facing the weighing of the heart and the hope of paradise in the field of reeds. Wealthy women were mummified and buried with elaborate grave goods to sustain them in the afterlife. Poorer women received simpler burials but still hoped for eternal life. The afterlife was imagined in ways that included feminine concerns, with goddesses welcoming the dead and provision made for families to be reunited in eternity. Whatever limitations women faced in mortal life, the promise of the afterlife offered hope for perfect joy beyond the grave. Fact 94. The end of ancient Egyptian civilization did not mean the end of women's influence in Egypt. Under Roman rule, Egyptian women maintained many traditional practices while adapting to new realities. The rise of Christianity brought new opportunities, with women becoming founders and leaders of monastic communities. The Christian monasteries of Egypt included houses for women where they could live lives of prayer and study outside the constraints of marriage. Some of these communities produced remarkable women leaders whose influence extended beyond Egypt into the wider Christian world. Fact 95. The continuing discovery of texts, artifacts, and monuments from ancient Egypt means that our understanding of women's lives continues to evolve. Each new find potentially adds to our knowledge of queens, priestesses, and ordinary women. Technology allows non-invasive examination of mummies, revealing information about health, diet, and life experiences without disturbing the dead. Linguistic analysis helps interpret obscure references in ancient texts. The women of ancient Egypt are not static subjects of unchanging historical knowledge but dynamic figures whose stories continue to unfold as scholarship advances. Fact 96. Egyptian women's voices come to us filtered through male-dominated record systems that often ignored or distorted their experiences. The texts that survive were mostly written by men about topics men considered important. Women appear in these records primarily in relation to men, as wives, mothers, and daughters rather than as independent actors. Recovering women's own perspectives requires reading against the grain, seeking glimpses of female experience in texts focused elsewhere, and interpreting material evidence like tomb paintings and personal items that reveal aspects of life that official records ignored. Fact 97. The importance of studying women in ancient Egypt extends beyond historical curiosity to broader questions about human experience and social organization. How societies treat women reflects fundamental values about power, family, and the sacred. Egypt's relatively favorable treatment of women compared to other ancient civilizations raises questions about what factors determine women's status and how change occurs. The rise and fall of powerful queens illuminates how exceptional individuals can transcend social constraints while also showing the limits of individual achievement in transforming basic structures. Fact 98. The queens of the Nile left monuments that still stand, mummies that have survived millennia, and stories that continue to captivate. Hatshepsut's temple rises against the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, its columns telling her story in stone and paint. Nefertiti's beauty survives in Berlin, controversial but undeniably powerful. Cleopatra's legend lives in countless retellings, each generation reimagining the last pharaoh for its own purposes. These women achieved the immortality that Egyptians believed possible through preservation of the body and memory. As long as we speak their names, they live. Fact 99. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself once more in that temple carved into the golden cliffs. The painted reliefs tell stories of expeditions to distant lands, of divine birth, of a woman who wore the beard of kingship and ruled Egypt for 20 glorious years. Outside, the desert stretches to the horizon, unchanged since Hatshepsut herself stood here over 3,000 years ago. The Nile flows past as it always has and always will, eternal river of eternal Egypt. And somewhere in the valley below, hidden beneath sand and stone, queens still sleep in their painted tombs, waiting for visitors who will speak their names and ensure they live forever. The women who ruled Egypt remind us that power takes many forms and finds unexpected channels. That barriers, however formidable, can sometimes be overcome by determination, intelligence, and circumstance. That the past holds stories of women's achievement that were hidden or forgotten but can be recovered and celebrated. As you drift into dreams, carry with you the image of a woman in pharaoh's regalia, false beard on her chin and crook and flail in her hands, gazing toward eternity with confidence that her name would be remembered and her deeds would endure. Sleep well, and may the goddesses of Egypt watch over your rest.